Thank you very much, Mrs. Schaefer-Preuss, for your presentation, sharing with us the concept of inclusive growth and how ADB is realizing that. To open up the discussion, I would like to call on my colleague, Ellen deBrauw. Ellen is a senior research fellow here at IFPRI in the Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division, and I asked him at very short notice to offer a few remarks and help us trigger off a conversation. Ellen, would you like to come up here and speak for about 5 minutes or so and start off the discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, Rajul. Thank you, Ursula, for the stimulating talk. I want to pick out a few details in what you said, because I'm a very empirical researcher, and so I'm going to wear my biases right on my sleeve, and so I know that the devil is really in the details. And so one thing I want to speak to and maybe comment on is the fact that, for lack of a better way to put it, Asia is really big and really different. Just thinking about the challenges that we think of in terms of thinking about Asia in one whole, on the one hand, China and India together make up more than 25% of the world's population. Whereas you're also talking about, as the Asian Development Bank, policies for countries like Laos, which is very mountainous and very sparsely populated, or Fiji, my wife's favorite country, which is a set of diverse and again sparsely populated islands, and so I can imagine that the policies that are pro-inclusive growth must be different for a country like, to some extent, are different for a country like Fiji or Laos that might have bigger infrastructural challenges in getting public goods to, or even local public goods to particular groups of citizens, versus a country like China or India that's quite densely populated, at least on the whole. The second thing that I want to talk about a little bit is, and this struck me when you showed us the graph on changes in Gini ratios, and I'm going to borrow from Martin Ravalian a little bit, in that he likes to talk, when he talks about poverty, he talks about the concept of relative inequality versus the concept of absolute inequality. And just to make this concept clear, let's say that everybody in this room had 5% income growth over the last year. Actually, probably negative 5% income growth is more likely. But let's consider that everybody had 5% income growth. And my income was $100 a year, and Jerry's there was $1,000 last year. Well, this year I'd be making $105, whereas Jerry's making $1,050. The point is that my income has actually changed very little as the relatively poor person, whereas Jerry's has changed quite a bit more. And if we went up to 100,000 or a million, we'd see a much bigger increase in his income in absolute terms. And so when we think about pro-poor growth, one of the challenges is, even if we have inequality that's not changing, if the country is already unequal, quite unequal in its income distribution, we have it's a much bigger job to get people who have very low incomes growing their incomes at the same levels as people who are doing quite well. I think of China as a very good example in this case, where if you think about, we know that there's extremely rapid growth that's been going on over the past 30 or so years in China, and they're inordinately rich people now in China, whereas we didn't see that before. I think the news reports over the weekend said that they sold something like 250,000 iPhone 4s in like 48 hours in China, which tells you that there's some real income out there. On the other hand, we know that there's pretty deep poverty particularly amongst older people living in rural areas in China, which kind of screams at the need for a pension program, but it's actually got to be a pretty substantial pension program to make people even close to as well off as say the near poor in China, or what are now the urban poor in China. Okay. Third point that I want to make, and this is stimulating I want to stimulate maybe some discussion on this point, and Marie Ruel, the division director in our division, would have would be making the same point, is that I heard the word nutrition come up once in your talk, and I'm thinking about, in particular, the concept of inclusive growth, meaning that we want to have equality of opportunity for people. If we think about the equality of opportunity, well, the equality of opportunity starts actually in the womb, and mothers who don't receive the proper nutrition are already going to have the growth potential of those kids are already going to be, we know from research, is already lower than the growth potential amongst mothers who get really good nutrition or proper nutrition while their kids are growing. Then kids from 0 to 2 also is a crucial point in development. If kids get proper nutrition, they get started on a healthy growth path, and they're going to be much more likely now to reach we know for sure from research again that we know they're going to be much more likely to reach their potential. We know from studies that PHN has done in Guatemala, long-term studies, that incomes actually are higher amongst kids who've received nutrition interventions when they're under 2 than kids who haven't received those nutrition interventions. We know from research in the US that's just been released that kids who do better in kindergarten actually make more money over the course of their lifespan. Getting them to kindergarten at the point where they can reach their full growth potential is also important. So you talked about education, you talked about health, but I'm wondering if there are programs for infant and young child nutrition that are perhaps more important to making sure that the equality of opportunity is there for maybe not for this generation, but for the next generation. Okay, and that's basically what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Alan. Ursula, we are a research organization, so we tend to put different issues on the table. Would you like to comment at this point, or shall I invite some comments from our audience?
Maybe I very briefly come very briefly react to a few comments. For sure, we're looking into the countries, Fiji, Laos, PDR, Armenia, and so on. One has to come with very differentiated policy, prescriptions, advice, and how to design programs. This is no doubt. That is no doubt, and this is what we are doing. Looking into relative equality, inequality, I think there you have really made an important point. This is really one also there has to look what are we talking about, and when we look at just the average,
what we are talking about is these are average figures, and also there I think one has to go in the various sections and see how is the situation developing. Well, country like the Philippines, where ADB is located, you can see the overall income, the macroeconomic indicators are improving, but the gap between rich and poor is growing and growing and growing. That means inequality is also growing. The issue with nutrition, indeed, I did not properly include this herein, but that is an issue. We are aware of that. ADB has so far not very much focused on this, as you can imagine, but it comes up more and more actively also related to climate change issues, related to the changing consumption patterns in the upcoming countries with a higher middle income class, China, India, where nutrition is an issue and it's changing, and then also in the context of mother and child-related issues, maternal and child death. A lot is related to nutrition. So this is an area where we have to put more focus on. We just have signed, as an example, a memorandum of understanding with UNICEF taking into account what UNICEF is doing in this area and where we jointly, I assume, could do much better and much more also as a development bank.